Welcome back to Way Too Early. Just shy of 5:30 here on the East Coast, 2:30 out west. I'm Ali Vitali. President Trump plans to get back out on the road, visiting Pennsylvania on Tuesday to spotlight his efforts with the economy. It comes as Trump has repeatedly claimed affordability concerns are a Democratic hoax. A White House official says Trump will argue he inherited an inflation crisis from former President Biden. Trump narrowly won Pennsylvania last year, and the White House is looking to shore up economic support ahead of the 2026 midterms. Several seats that could flip in that state alone. But it comes as new polling shows a growing number of Americans, including Trump voters, are blaming the president for higher prices. A new political poll finds affordability is the top issue for U.S. voters, with 56% of them saying the cost of living is their biggest concern. 46% say the cost of living is the worst they can remember. And when broken down by party, 37% of people who voted for Trump in 2024 share that view. Want to bring in Democratic Congressman Joe Morelle of New York. We are back here on your home turf as well. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
As you talk about this affordability crisis, I think Democrats are squarely putting the cost of health care at the center of that. Yes. Just yesterday, we saw the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say that they're going to vote sometime next week on Thursday on an Affordable Care Act subsidies extension. It would just be clean. 3 years. Republicans not likely to go for that. So where does that leave Democrats and some moderate Republicans in the House who want to do something but might not have a path forward on it? Definitely not before the end of the year.
Yeah, more importantly, where does it leave the 20 million Americans who rely on the tax credits to have affordability on their health care? But I have to believe that moderate House Republicans are going to continue to push for some action. And I think the leadership in the House ought to be very concerned that you could do discharge petitions or somehow push to have a bill on the tax credits before the House, and the Senate would have to deal with it as well. But the important thing to remember is in about 21 days or so, 20 million Americans are going to face either massive increases of premiums or not be able to afford health insurance at all. That is a national crisis. Yeah. And so Republicans should be concerned about it.
I've had so many viewers write in and say my subsidies have spiked 100%, 200%, larger numbers than that. And I think it's because, we're seeing those prices start rolling out through the exchanges. But what would you tell those Americans who are seeing those prices? They heard the speaker, they heard others say, well, we'll get to this by the end of the year. We should do something. And ultimately, even if something happens through a discharge petition or another mechanism, that's January at the earliest. Yeah. What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, it'll be cold comfort to them that this is what we've been saying now since October, when the shutdown began. We have to do this now. Open enrollment is happening. And these are people who are working. I mean, these are tax credits that help people who are working, whose employers don't provide health insurance. They're going to be stuck. Their families are going to be stuck, and they're not going to have any coverage. They'll be effectively paying for health care out of pocket, which if you have a catastrophic event, it could send you into decades of debt.
I wonder what you make of the criticism, though, from some Republicans who say, well, Schumer putting a 3-year clean extension isn't serious because he knows Republicans were never going to vote for that.
Well, look, then they could say they haven't. We'll do a 2-year extension. What is it? How do you end up having a disagreement settled between two parties? You sit down and you negotiate, but they haven't done that. They seem to have virtually no interest in governing. It is astonishing. It is not dissimilar to when they were off for 5 weeks in the House. They're back, but still not doing anything. It is a disgrace. This is the worst do-nothing Congress that we've seen in decades.
Yeah, I do think it's pretty stunning that on an issue that would benefit Republican and Democratic voters alike, the politics of it are such that I'm almost surprised we didn't see some kind of a four corners meeting or something else to try to show the gravity of the situation and the reason that a negotiation would be important. So here we are at the end of the year, likely with nothing happening on that, but we'll look ahead to next Thursday for that vote in the Senate. On the other side of this, we've seen security concerns only continue to grow for members of Congress because of the place that you sit on the House Admin Committee. You are part of those requests for potentially increased security for members. What are those conversations like right now, especially in light of the 6 members between the House and the Senate who have seen increased threats because of a video that they made, basically just reminding those serving in the armed services you don't have to obey illegal orders? What do you make of the security landscape now?
Well, look, not a day goes by that I don't talk to members who are really concerned either about specific threats that they're experiencing or just the general attitude of what's going on. And what the president says about people, what he says about members of Congress, how he seems to continue to encourage violence, calling for the hanging of 6 members of the United States Congress. I don't think taxpayers want us to spend inordinate amounts of money on our security. They're concerned about their own safety.
Yeah.
By the same token, it's really hard if you're a constituent and your member of Congress is suddenly less interested in having town hall meetings or engaging because of security concerns. So these are really important issues. And frankly, they take away from earnest debate in the House and in the Senate and ultimately hurt the American people.
Do you think that we're going to see a difference in the security posture for members, though?
Well, we're continuing to add some resources to this. We have doubled the amount we're doing for security back home. I'm going to continue to push for more because I do want members, their families, staff, and constituents not to have concerns or anxiety when they're engaging in public conversations.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And the way that you tie it to their ability to do constituent outreach is, I think, a really foundational piece of this. It's not just people being scared for their own security, which they should be as people. At the same time, it's also hampering one of the key parts of being a representative is meeting with your actual constituents. Democratic Congressman Joe Morelle of New York, always great to see you.
Nice
Thank you for coming on.